Hello everyone, I welcome you to another video by Legacy IAS where we are going to talk about and decode the entire GS paper 2 of Mains 2022. The paper which happened recently is something that as aspirants of the UPSC examination, we should be doing the previous year's questions. It really helps us in getting an insight as to whether we are on the right track, if our preparation needs more attention in certain areas, what are the things that I could also focus upon more and improve upon. All right. So we basically get an idea of all these things in this particular paper and the analysis that is going to follow. So we are going to understand that what is the strategy that we could basically use for appearing for mains exams. What is the approach through which we can start writing the questions for specifically for GS paper 2 and try and understand what this paper was all about. Now, as far as the GS paper 2 of Mains 22 was concerned, the polity questions which were there were fairly direct in terms of constitutional positions, the election commission. The questions were slightly pretty direct and did not require you to kind of mix and converge too many aspects. In fact, the governance paper also was talking about very specific governance issues, but also not too much focus on welfare schemes per se. There was, of course, a lot of emphasis on Supreme Court judgments and constitutional amendments and analysis of that. So, in terms of the performance based on the evolution of any welfare scheme or a topic, the evolution, the good, bad, and also the Supreme Court judgments which have supported or accelerated the efforts, that was a big focus as far as this paper was concerned. So let us start and look at the discussion of each of these questions. Now the first question says that the most significant achievement of modern law in India is the constitutionalization of environmental problems by the Supreme Court. Discuss this statement with the help of relevant case laws. Now, there is a specific mention and rather a demand of the question to be addressed through several Supreme Court judgments. So that is how the approach of this particular answer should be. We have a limitation of 150 words, but as far as an explanation of this answer, I will of course try to give you a elaborate detail, and while writing the answer, you can use these pointers and make very specific bullet points to answer the question. So as far as the environmental problem is concerned, all right, the entire world is grappling with something of an environmental issue, and India is of course no different. Moreover, there has been a continued or rather reinvigorated focus that has come over the years by into a push to environment, and that is the need of the question. So we have to first discuss with regards to what are the constitutional provisions which are there, which are quite relevant, and in very brief it can be mentioned so that you also understand the direction in which we are moving. That definitely the provision of expanding the meaning of Article 21, okay, and incorporating and implementing the aspect of due process of law in experiencing or explaining that how clean environment, protection of environment is basically supporting your idea of right to life, which is a fundamental right of an individual in the country. All right. So in that sense, we additionally also have Article 51A as a duty of the citizen to look after the natural environment and all the components under it. One of the directive principles also talks about ways through which we improve the environment and the forests and the wildlife. So the point is that there has always been an attention being given to environmental concerns. But the point is that there have been a lot of recent judgments which have come, the relevant case studies which have happened, which indicate the focus of the government and also how Supreme Court has basically constitutionalized the environmental problems. Okay, that is what we're going to look here. Now, as far as the most popular one is the expansion of Article 21 in the Maneka Gandhi versus Union of India case. All right, so you can talk about both a procedure established by law and due process of law. The other point which you could have mentioned is the MC Mehta case versus the Union of India of 1986, where there has been a right to talk about, or the requirement of a pollution-free environment, which is essential to support your right to life. All right, or just right to live in a pollution free environment is very, very essential to human existence. You have another case which came up in 1992, according to which under Article 19 Clause 1, it does not include the freedom to use loudspeaker or sound amplifiers. So the kind of pollution that we're talking about is noise pollution. So one is environmental pollution, the other also talked about is noise pollution. All right, but at the same time, it also in 91 we also had a case which talked about the right to enjoy a pollution free water. Okay, so here of course you can add the Government of India initiatives of Swachh Bharat and programs like Clean Ganga. Okay, but the point that we're trying to make, that some of these laws and the constitutional instruments, the constitutional articles which have been just talked about, they indicate how over the years Supreme Court has actually started working on the implementation and realization of these constitutional practices through the different judgments which has come up in the recent years. And that is how we basically have to answer that Supreme Court in this regard has been very instrumental in constitutionalizing this environmental problems. All right, so here by mentioning the case studies, you're validating that A, you understand, and B, you have the information. Next, we have the second question talking about that right to movement and residence throughout the territory of India is freely available to the Indian citizens, but these rights are not absolute. In fact, this is not very difficult a statement if you actually come to think of it. We are talking of fundamental rights, and we are talking of the right to freedom and the context of reasonable restrictions. This is something you actually quite directly study while studying fundamental rights and right to freedom. So in that sense, it is a decently direct statement. Now, as far as freedom of movement and residence is concerned, there can be two perspectives to it, that whether you are talking about whether in the internal, meaning domestic movement, or you're talking in the international domain. Now, Article 19 basically is the one which protects with the one with regards to internal movements, where it talks about residence and movement, all right, and that every citizen can basically move and settle throughout the territory of India. But as far as Article 21 is concerned, that is talking about the right to reside in any part of the country, okay, within the India or even outside. So basically how you want to essentially live. Now, what is also very important is that we have to look at that these rights are not absolute. So how are they not absolute? Because they are restricted by reasonable restrictions. With regards to the right to movement, some of the reasonable restrictions are that you have restrictions in the interest of general public. Okay, this can be with regards to, let's say, the tribal population which stays in Andaman and Nicobar Islands. Okay, so it might not be in their interest, or protection of interest of scheduled tribes. All right, you have restrictions with regards to inner line permits. So we can have security considerations. All right, we can have environmental considerations through protected areas. We can have health. Okay, health as an emergency. Major reason why basically we can have some amount of restrictions with regards to movement and travel. So these are reasonable and each of these are fairly wanted and accepted and encouraged by the public as well. So that is how you basically kind of can use these examples to show that these restrictions are reasonable and done for larger public interest, and which is why the freedom of movement as well as residence is not an absolute right. Moving on to the third question, it says, or rather it asks, to what extent in your opinion, okay, has the decentralization of power in India changed the governance landscape in the grassroots? Now, a great way of addressing this particular question is to give a lot of examples. Now, how will it help is because it has asked you your opinion. So here it's trying to obviously come up with something that is very specific and very, very something that you basically make sense of. Okay, so when you give examples, you're trying to show that you are able to make sense of what the situation is. You are coming from a place of knowledge and a place of analysis. Okay, so here when we talk about decentralization of power, of course, we cannot ignore the 73rd and 74th Constitutional Amendment Acts. As it is, local governance is one of the very favorite topics of UPSC. Time and again, it has come in the papers. So as a takeaway and strategy is that it continues to be relevant and it's always very important for all your future UPSC examinations. All right. So here we are basically, as far as decentralization is concerned, this basically means that how you're transferring the control of an activity to basically a lot of local offices and authorities. Okay, rather than having it being centralized, you basically kind of giving it out to other institution, organization, departments, agencies, and at the much local level. Okay, how does this help? It strengthens the grassroots capacity. Okay, incorporates a lot of customization. As far as India is concerned, there is a lot of diversity with regards to geography, with regards to culture, with regards to language. So a lot of that gets accommodated here. We are able to accomplish or go up in the system of governance. Since it's also mentioned governance, we have basically improved our bottom-up approach. Okay, we have tried to have a more participative participative governance through the involved or the active participation of the Gram Sabhas. So how have we done it? Let's look at it. Firstly, we've done it on an administrative level, we've done it on a fiscal level and also political level. Basically, we have provided the local government with funds, okay, functionaries, and very important is functions. If they wouldn't have any tasks to do, what will these funds and functionaries do, right? So in that sense, decentralization of power has really kind of shaped the way in which by giving examples of the grassroots level, you can really mention by sharing examples that how they have been strengthened as institutions. How much are they able to have a say? Let's say with regards to exploitation of natural resources, or say with regards to their participation in the Jan Dhan Yojana, in fiscal expansion, fiscal inclusion, financial inclusion, all right, how they have been incorporated in Manrega and other government welfare schemes, all right. So agriculture, health, lot of these areas are where a lot of decentralization has kind of helped in achieving this objective. So that's how basically decentralization has changed the way in which governance happen. It's much more participatory democracy. It's following a bottom-up approach. All right. It's incorporating people. It's much more accommodative. Diversity is included. All right. A lot of regional identities are supported. There is customization. So because of these inputs and these exchange, this is how our governments landscape is essentially changing. The next question, again, I would say it's one of the most direct questions that UPSC could ask. You could make it interesting by giving examples and trying to show some of, if there are any diversities, kind of dilemmas, what kind of position it can become sometimes little challenging if is there any controversy with regards to it. So those kind of elements you can add towards the end just to make it a little more interesting, but otherwise it's a fairly direct question which talks about the role of the vice president. So vice president, its position, okay, how it is the ex officio chairman, not being a member of the house, still being a very important member of the Rajya Sabha, who prorogues the session, who summons the session, all right, who's the principal spokesperson, who maintains order in the house, looks at the requirement of quorum while adjourning and suspending a sitting, okay, facilitates the legislative activities in the countries, all right. How his vote is very important in the event of a tie, but he's not member of the Rajya Sabha, so he cannot vote in the first instance. How basically we have the chairman also given the authority to interpret the different rules and constitutional provisions, okay. His role vis-a-vis the president, or rather his role in the absence of the president, while acting as the president or discharging the functions as the president, okay. How he controls and directs the Rajya Sabha secretariat, okay. So lot of these questions, lot of these pointers kind of indicate that how you can just mention a statement that he is a presiding officer like the speaker, but does not enjoy as many powers as the speaker, okay. So that can be a point of comparison, and again add an element. His position as the so he's someone who should be well aware with the duties that a president has to abide by, including protection of the constitution. So these kind of things kind of highlight upon the role of the vice president as the chairman of the Rajya Sabha, okay. So that's how we essentially go forward with this particular answer. Now the next question talks about or asks the role of the National Commission, which has been promoted rather in some way from a statutory body to a constitutional body. You can very briefly talk about this commission and its purpose in terms of safeguarding the interests of some of the socially and educationally backward sections, and how with the recent amendment you have the addition of a new article in the constitution. Now firstly, how does a constitutional status help you? It provides a greater transparency, a constitutional provision, a legitimacy with regards to this particular section of the population. All right, that they do need that attention, they do need that constitutional provision. In addition to reservation, they need all kinds of development, which is really been absent. Okay, so you can speak in terms of development, in terms of health, education, housing, okay, food, sanitation, lot of aspects which can be strengthened through this constitutional status. The next question is again something which is, I would definitely say it's a direct question, because if you look at the question, it is talking of a specific theme which was so important and relevant, all these last few months for that matter, whether this year or even previous year, of Gati Shakti Yojana, where we're talking about how, see, connectivity today has become so very important, especially after COVID, or just how we are trying to connect all elements so that faster movement of public transport goods is accelerated, facilitated. All right. So here they are trying to indicate towards some kind of limitation or some kind of challenge that we are facing in achieving our goal of connectivity. Okay, and here we are talking about or emphasizing upon the need for coordination, between the two main stakeholders of this particular program, this yojana, that is the government and the private sector. So there is, according to this question, an acceptance of the fact that there is a challenge in this goal of connectivity because of this lack of coordination. Now you have to essentially discuss it. So you have to very directly mention the pointers, okay? And once you mention the pointers, you essentially can give an alternative, meaning a positive side as well. So here we can start off by talking about what it is, a master plan for this multimodal connectivity, all right, which is going to provide integrated and seamless connectivity of people, goods, services, all right. We've witnessed basically this lack of coordination often leads to a lot of wasteful expenditure and inconvenience. Okay, so a lot of steps have been taken to improve the time taking, the approval process that is there, that creates a lot of burden, and this through coordinated efforts can basically improve and strengthen our approval process. Lots of and multiple rather regulatory clearances. Okay, so essentially it's about time that we give a holistic look to this particular scheme so that we are able to achieve our goal of connectivity. And it's only about coordination. So coordination should be the least of the troubles. So which is why that if this is achieved, large part of our plan is going to be achieved through holistic planning. Currently, we are lacking in that. Okay, so basically our planning, designing should not be done separately, okay, in separate chambers and compartments and in different offices. If we execute it with a common vision, much can be achieved in the case of the Gati Shakti Yojana. Now the next question talks about the persons with disabilities. So disabilities has basically gained a lot of attention in a lot of papers and in UPSC over the years. So you're advised to always keep a note of it in terms of the acts that are coming, in terms of some of the schemes, welfare programs that they've come up with, or some infrastructural arrangements for them. Okay, so as far as this question is concerned, it asks that this act, which came back in 2016, remains only a legal document. Okay, and the problem is lack of sensitization among both the government functionaries as well as the citizens. So here there is a very specific problem that is being highlighted with regards to awareness and sensitization, and not just among the citizens, also among the government functionaries, which makes it all the more critical in terms of the implementation and realization of this policy. So there are a lot of constitutional provisions, right to equality within DPSP, okay, how that India is a welfare state, how we basically should be looking after both age-old as well as disability, and we should be promoting the spirit of brotherhood among all the people in India. So as far as this particular bill is concerned, we are of course in unison, or rather in trying to implement the UN conventions, okay, and how India has basically come up with its own right with regards to this UN convention. All right, there are lots of disabilities which have been identified by the governments here, but the point as far as this particular act is concerned, we are trying to promote welfare of these people. Okay, we are trying to do that through reservations, through allocation of lands. Okay, we have come up with a lot of schemes like Accessible India scheme, Sugamya Bharat Abhiyan, and also some of the provisions which kind of support and try to realize this or help the persons with these disabilities. But where the problem lies, as the question says, that there's lack of sensitization. So lot of the sensitization has basically come up in some of the Supreme Court judgments as well, that even certificates are not being provided. So it kind of deprives them of really getting some amount of support which has been granted. So one needs to be very sensitive in terms of at least taking the first step forward, which is certifying them. All right. there is very poor resource allocation that is there, and even if it is there, it is not utilized. All right. During COVID also, we did not see that there was any targeted scheme, particularly to the persons with disabilities. All these have created an issue with regards to the realization of this particular document. Why does the government authorities, with regards to public, how people basically kind of on questions of both castes as well as gender, public is still very insensitive on these grounds. All right. Lot of the private buildings which have created some facilities for these disabled people are not in proportion with their particular interest. So there's a gap in understanding that what is their essential requirement. All right. So we are still yet to realize and implement our element of fraternity as mentioned in the constitution. Schools and colleges, like all public spaces, have a lot of stigmas and superstitions which really have to be addressed and looked into for us to not just have an act but also see some change in the ground reality. So this is what this is how you essentially can address these questions in as far as the mains paper is concerned. Now, again, a popular and a long-standing important question and issue is the direct benefit transfer scheme, something which has been popular on Independence Day speeches, also on Republic Day speeches, and on question of financial inclusion. Okay, so we are trying to look at this question, which is accepting that direct benefit scheme is definitely a progressive step, but there are some limitations. So we have to talk about both in a way and come up with a conclusion, because we're here to comment. So we have to give an analysis. Okay, we have to in a way give our own opinion. So as far as this scheme is concerned, we are trying to transfer the subsidy and entitlement to the beneficiary's bank account, and the linkages have really helped in getting this particular thing accessed. But as far as the limitations are concerned, especially because of the socio-economic census, we have basically seen families who are hiding their scheme, and a lot of non-poor people have been included. So the creamy layer issue has basically not been solved yet. A lot of people are excluded because they're not able to provide the sufficient documents to support that they belong to this category. All right. So we are trying to look at some of the fundamental problems with regards to the direct benefit scheme. Also, this particular scheme is more of a revenue expenditure. Had it been a capital expenditure, we would have seen more of asset creation. All right. So infrastructure creation is better, much better in terms of providing multiple effects or multiplier effects as compared to subsidies. Okay. Here we are basically trying to look into some of the reasons why we should be promoting the direct benefit schemes, that how it is the way forward, and definitely it is a successive step. So it is a essential part of the sustainable development goals as well. So we have to look at the challenges, the issues which are there to make the system much more robust and strong. And that is what the demand of this question is also. Next question is talking of, or a question on international relations, and again one of the most relevant topic, because Sri Lanka has been facing major issues. It's a country which is facing a big crisis, and just our very close maritime neighbor, something that's happening there makes it all the more relevant for us. Now, as far as the traditional age-old relations are concerned, we actually have a legend which says that Hanuman went all the way up till there. So it's almost like he's done a diplomatic job for us and established or brought in relations. But in post-independence India, we see a very important pacts being signed between the two nations through the Shastri Sirimavo Pact, which talked about how do you repatriate some of the people. Also, there have been some issues of differences through the during the Rajiv Gandhi period, through the peacekeeping force which had been brought into Sri Lanka. Now, as far as the current crisis is concerned, okay, we are looking at Sri Lanka troubled with inflation, problems of lack of energy, and then black marketing and hoarding going on, lots and lots of power cuts affecting normal life in the country. So India happens to be one of the third countries to whom Sri Lanka owes a lot of debt. So that makes India's role extremely important, in Sri Lanka meeting its financial commitments. Okay, so India could, this is again a suggestion that it could consider a moratorium on the debt repayment for Sri Lanka, all right, so that it will help Sri Lanka maintain its needs and needs of the people, especially like very basic ones. So we are trying to support this on humanitarian grounds, and it is something that is very, very relevant to us, Sri Lanka as a nation, and what's happening there, especially with Chinese influence in our neighborhood. Helping them, supporting them has mutual benefits and definitely important for India's strategic stability. So in that sense, India and Sri Lanka's relation on the past as well and the current scenario is something which was very rightly and appropriately asked in the mains paper. The other two organizations which have been talked about, or rather one is being talked about and differences with SAARC is being reflected. We are essentially talking about our area, the South Asian region, and talking about two important international organizations. All right. So SAARC was formed with a different objective of economic integration in South Asia. All right. But BIMSTEC was almost like an outcome of India's Act East policy. So the orientation with which it's being done is slightly different. But if we still look at the similarities and dissimilarities as is being asked in the question, we are saying that of course it's trying to integrate South Asia with Southeast Asia, all right, bring in regional integration, which SAARC was unable to fulfill. But in BIMSTEC, basically, this particular element is very important. Unlike in SAARC, the bilateral issues are not discussed in BIMSTEC. All right. So this kind of focuses upon pure economic integration, connectivity programs and issues, and that is how we basically move forward. Now, as far as BIMSTEC is concerned, it's important for India's Act East policy, important for India to show its position in the Southeast Asian region, especially in the growing influence and dominance of China. All right. So India has planned to merge the motor vehicles agreement with the BIMSTEC, and it's trying to reinstart, make it more active, and definitely it's very different from SAARC as far as the South Asian organization or South Asian integration is concerned. If we look at again a question on polity, Representation of People Act, both 1950 as well as 1951, it is an explicit mention in the syllabus also, and continuous questions on this should make you realize that this is something I should not leave out. All right, so you can mention at the outset some of the features of this Representation of People's Act as an introduction. Okay. Now, this particular Representation of People's Act is essentially done for the conduct of elections. So, for the conduct of elections, how representation of election petition to the High Courts, okay, jurisdiction, how it lies with the High Court, essentially, all of this is being discussed in the RPA with regards to petitions, with regards to presentation of these petitions. How 45 days is the end limit for any candidate or elector on the date of the election. So, we are trying to look at the question from the sense that what are the grounds on which basically the election of any returned candidate may be declared void. So in this context, we have to continue to look at the important pointers which are there mentioned in the RPA Act of 1951 and the questions with regards to the ground for disqualification. All right. So on the grounds of disqualification, we have bribery, social crimes, untouchability, insulting the national flag, the constitution, promoting enmity on the basis of some identities, offenses relating to like social crimes of cruelty or rape, all right, which for which you are sentenced to almost 2 years of imprisonment. So when we are looking at this particular RPA, we are also having to refer to the case laws as is mentioned here. So here the different cases that is mentioned, Abraham Singh, Lily Thomas and also Jan Chaukidari, we are kind of taking away or developing this understanding that there are definitely grounds on which through which a person who basically any returning candidate and his election can be declared void. So what has the government or rather the Supreme Court has said in these particular scenarios? What you can also talk about, it's actually slightly a longish question, so I'm only mentioning the pointers here. The remedies which are there, that how you can basically appeal to the Supreme Court to get your grievances redressed from the highest lawmaker, highest justice provider in the country, how the executive authorities basically have to act or should be acting according to the advice of the constitutional body election commission. We can utilize the power of a civil court position that is being given to the election commission, and that is how we can basically address the issues which are there by the aggrieved party. So slightly longish, and that's why there is 250 words mentioned here, but there are a lot of points which have to be incorporated while writing this particular answer. Let's look at our next question, which is talking about conditions which are necessary for the exercise of the legislative powers of the governor, and this is particularly talking about ordinances. In fact, the legality of repromulgation of ordinance, all right, without placing them before the legislature. It's something of a crisis sort of a situation that has come up, because placing an ordinance before the legislature happens to be primary in terms of ensuring that the government mandate, the public mandate is kind of fulfilled. So that is getting affected. So if you look at the conditions for the exercise of legislative power, we basically are looking at Council of Ministers, and their recommendations are always essential with regards to summoning, prorogation and dissolution. Moreover, the questions of disqualification of members in the state legislature has to be done in consultation with the ECI, the Election Commission of India. The governor can reserve the bill for the consideration of the president as long as it does not endanger, the position of, especially if it endangers the position of the state high court. Also, several other bills can be reserved by the governor for the president, which is if it violates DPSP, if it affects the larger interest and national importance of the country. Moreover, any ordinance can be promulgated or withdrawn on the advice of this particular council, which is headed by the chief minister. So this is about the essential requirements. Now, the legality of repromulgation. Now, the case of DC Wadhwa in 1987, all right, it said that successive repromulgation with the same text without any attempt to get them passed by the assembly is basically a violation of the constitution. You should get it done, you should get it passed instead of repromulgating. So that's almost like a violation. All right. So this exceptional power of, it's supposed to be exceptional. This ordinance making power is ordinance or rather law making power through ordinance is almost exceptional and can never be seen as a substitute to the legislative power. Okay. In the Krishna Kumar case of 2017, in fact, this was treated as a fraud, and you are trying to subvert the democratic process because the state legislature or the lower house for that matter they are representing the public per se, so that democratic ethos is kind of getting disturbed. Of course, we were seeing that, sometimes in times of crisis like the COVID-19 pandemic, it was sometimes necessary, but it does not mean that this kind of process should be encouraged. It's not healthy. So, in that sense, the legality is such that through constitutional provisions as well as Supreme Court judgments, it has come out that you have to essentially do it only in times of crisis, when there is absolutely either of the two houses are not in session, and it has to be done. But ultimately it needs the approval of the people who have been representative of the public. All right, moving on to our next question, that when the national political parties in India favor centralization, we have the regional parties who are favoring the state autonomy. We are looking essentially at two sets of or two kinds of parties. When we look at the national parties, they kind of give preference to the national issues, obviously because they are trying to have a much larger appeal. So they cannot have a very regional centric identity, regional centric approach, regional centric issue to be focused on. They will in a way focused on larger issues of, let's say, defense or security or foreign policy, or larger issues of health, education, employment. All right, whereas when we speak of regional parties, they are wanting, obviously because they have their clout in their respective states, so they would focus on the development which is required in the states. As it is, India has lopsided development, okay, and that too development is of different kinds in various states. So we actually lack some kind of parity and uniformity. This gives even more leverage to the regional parties to kind of influence the state politics in this regard, which is why they constantly favor state autonomy as compared to the regional, as compared to the national identity. So in that sense, in that perspective, we basically have the state parties supporting regional aspirations, supporting regional identities and state autonomy. There is also an important thing to be remembered, that as far as these local issues are concerned, they kind of also indicate that this is possible because of the quasi-federal nature of the Indian government. The division of power that we have kind of gives certain amount of autonomy to these state parties and these regional politics. That is why you have essentially these regional parties talking about state specific demands. So in that sense, that is the kind of difference that we see between a national party and a regional party, with the kind of aspirations, ethos, philosophy that they have. And that is what defines the way in which the nature of centralization or decentralization that they support. The next question is more about comparative politics between the presidents of India and France. Okay, there have been questions about secularism between India and France. So in this context, this is purely fact based in terms of, because they're trying to examine the procedures. All right. So when we look at the procedure, if we talk about France, we are talking of direct universal suffrage, through which all French citizens are basically voting. So there is direct election. This is a difference with regards to the Indian side, because we have indirect election for the president through an electoral college. All right. For someone to be a candidate, we also have a kind of nomination, but the method of the election is basically quite different. We have proportional representation by means of single transferable vote. So this question of a second round of election is also there, but slightly in a different format. Announcement of results is such that it is done within 10 days by the Constitutional Council. For us, it's the Election Commission. And also the 5-year term is renewable once. So if we look at, in comparison on the Indian side, as I was mentioning, indirect election through electoral college, nomination such that it is subscribed by at least 50 electors as proposers and 50 electors as seconders. Also, we have a quota system. So, towards the conclusion, you can definitely mention that the kind of system, especially the parliamentary system that India has. Okay. And how we are not making it direct, because in a parliamentary system there is a head of state and a head of government. You can also talk about that who is the real and who is the nominal head, which is what justifies and also speaks a lot about the nature of power that is being there between the presidents of India and the presidents of France, right? So that can be our level of comparison, that these presidents are also placed in a certain democratic context in which the entire country is operates. The next question is about the Election Commission with reference to the evolution of the Model Code of Conduct. So this Model Code of Conduct are nothing but, a set of norms which are being laid by the ECI himself, with in some way a consensus of the political parties. Now, if you look at the evolution, something which started way back in 1960, okay, soon after, little before the entire system of coalition parties or coalition politics began. So the state administration tried to prepare this code of conduct. Eventually, we also had it incorporated at the national level as well. But in 62, we also had, polls, the Lok Sabha and the assemblies also talking about such kind of or similar kind of codes being incorporated. When we look at 79, the Election Commission is coming up with some kind of a formal set of these codes and identities. And 91 was the first time when this MCC or the model code has been put in place to ensure fair elections in the country. Now, as far as the role of the Election Commission is concerned broadly, and specific reference to the Model Code of Conduct, we have, of course, the Election Commission looking into the elections, everything, conducts, superintendence, management in the Parliament as well as the state legislatures. And in the context of Model Code, we have to look at the fact that the ECI is entrusted with ensuring that there are no electoral offences or malpractices or corrupt practices. All right, voters are basically we are trying to have free and fair elections in all possible ways, and make use of the enforcement agencies wherever possible to ensure this free and fair elections. Lot of applications are also being used in these days to ensure the robustness of the system. All right. So these kind of MCCs, the codes are basically enforced, and politicians are being banned by the Election Commission to ensure its compliance. So over the years, not only has this turned out to be an important decorum to be maintained just before the elections and even soon after also, but also it's something that we are trying to make the system, trying to ensure a kind of a culture that we are creating around the electoral system. And that is where this culture is being reinstated, reinforced, maintained and managed by the Election Commission. And that is what is our answer to the role of this Election Commission as far as the Model Code of Conduct is concerned. Now, if we look at the welfare schemes, the question is asking that besides these welfare scheme, India essentially, and since this is discussed, we have to not just agree but elaborate that India needs a deft management of inflation as well as employment in order to serve the poor and the underprivileged sections. So if we look at unemployment is essentially is something which kind of needs attention for the poor section of the population, and we should be moving towards some kind of a deft management. If you look at the reasons, the problem is that in spite of these welfare schemes, we have not been able to manage this problem of unemployment in India. Okay, this unemployment actually kind of gives rise to a lot of other problems which are there in the society. So basic root cause and also symptoms as well as root cause, both of these things sometimes is what unemployment is. Worst is when they become or when they turn terrorists because they are not employed. All right, so it's essential that we have at least some amount of debt management according to the question. So our answer in this will be that poor families basically have limited money to spend on food and nutrition. All right, so obviously they're also not being able to spend on education. With regards to fuel, the way in which our fuel prices have become exorbitant, a lot of females even till today kind of use firewood collection for as far as managing their daily requirements is concerned. If we look at the rental that is there, especially after COVID-19, all of these rentals have basically increased. Okay, there is inflation on all fronts including fertilization, which is affecting the agriculture sector in our country. Okay, so all of this scenario cannot only be addressed by welfare measures. It is time that we should realize that there are welfare measures or welfare programs, that there are much larger, deeper and important problems which have to be addressed by a different approach, and one such approach can be debt management of inflation as well as unemployment. The next question is about the donor agencies. Okay, that if we continue to depend on a lot of these donor agencies, like of course World Bank and IMF, etc., we basically reduce our dependence on community participation. So when we are looking at community participation, we can expect a lot of customization, or rather sensitivity to local problems and issues. This is something that is missing in these donor agencies, because these donor agencies are definitely supporting different economic, social, political problems, but since it is a top down approach, it is not approaching on a very sensitive level. So the ground realities with regards to language, culture, religion, especially identities which are very prevalent in third world nations, okay, they get affected because of this. If we look at community participation, on the other hand, we can be more sensitive to local problems, like issues which are there in the Jaitapur plant or the Kundakulam project. All right, something that may be seen as very, very transformative as the fast bullet train, but the protests indicate that there are some different problems which equally have to be addressed at the ground level. All right, so a lot of times this kind of a dichotomy whereby you are trying to have a mega project but without giving too much attention, just because a donor feels that this particular thing is revenue generating and has a potential, they kind of sideline a lot of these local issues, problems, which really create a lot of issue. Which is why the answer to that is strengthening our lower level of governance by consulting the Gram Sabha on a lot of levels, having that kind of an audit, having that kind of incorporation, and a people-centric approach with regards to such developmental projects and donor-related acceptances. Okay. The other question that we have here is with regards to education. All right, that how right of children to free and compulsory education of 2009, okay, it unfortunately continues or rather remains inadequate in how we're trying to promote an incentive based system for the children if we are not generating awareness about the importance of schooling. There is a fundamental problem which is lacking in the country, and UPSC has highlighted that yes, the right to education is not generating the adequate amount of awareness, which is important for how you should be promoting schooling in the entire country, because we generally see that there is a lot of dropouts after class 1. A lot of time this happens because officials are under pressure. They just have to fill targets, they have to show numbers. Also, midday meals has one of the biggest reason for driving, or rather the children going to school, because they feel that they will be able, but that is not the purpose that education is trying to fulfill. As much as we're trying to give a nutrition, but the primary objective is education, that is not getting fulfilled. We are having a lot of absenteeism among the teachers. There is not much evaluation of how a student, how a child is developing, moving forward. So the importance of schooling has to be continuously be ingrained in the minds of the people. We are trying to build in thought, character, a lot of potential, or we are trying to expand, because which is missing currently. And the way in which our new education policy is trying to focus on critical skills, that might hopefully address this problem which is lacking at the current situation. For our sustainable development goals also, this is essential. So an answer to this hopefully is the new education policy. But at the same time, what we need to understand is that this awareness that is required is something that needs to be involved with how we are trying to promote the child's education. And your reasons of sending the child to school should not only be midday meals. All right, so that's how this it's a very big and important social problem. You see a lot of focus upon newspaper articles, editorials, or magazines like Yojana and Kurukshetra. Developing perspectives, that is what is required. This is not something that you will read in any book. It is not something, lot of these questions that we are going through on welfare schemes and otherwise, these are all newspaper deduced direct questions. So it is something which you kind of have to put in things together and use a lot of this knowledge to come up with this answer. So you just have to spend little more time with a lot of these resources, make the relevant notes out of it, understand the problems at a deeper level, and then come to the necessary conclusions. The next is again a topic on international relations, whereby this particular grouping and its utility in terms of putting India in the global map. How is that going to get accelerated, or how is that organization going to really help you? Okay. Now, of course, this is a body which has come out, which comprises of Israel, UAE, and United States beside India, which has come out of a lot of diplomatic participation. It kind of reflects that India is trying to balance between the Shia, Sunni, and the Jewish axis, and is a part of India's look west policy, or rather a culmination, or rather this grouping forms a part within the look west policy. So India will be able to kind of look into the regional power politics. Remember, India has a lot of stake as far as Iran, as far as Afghanistan, as far as Israel is concerned. So a lot of its issues are getting addressed through this. A lot of West Asian, Middle East countries are basically going to be very important supporters and partners. So this particular presence like this, or a grouping like this, and India's presence in this grouping just shows that it will really be able to kind of have a good influence in this particular region as far as the regional politics is concerned. All right. India can get the opportunity to kind of participate in a lot of forums like the Quadrilateral Alliance, and get involved in the issues in East Asia as well as West Asia. India can use this opportunity to talk about the issues relating to climate change, piracy, maritime security, as well as trade, especially in the context of COVID-19 and the entire disruption of supply chains. All right. So basically, when we are looking to expand our diplomatic influence, these kind of organizations can really become handy for India and establish its power in the global politics. we can really benefit when expanding, or rather when transiting from quad 1, quadrilateral 1 to quadrilateral 2, and all of this can enhance India's credentials in trying to put it self in the global map. So organizations like these, and especially if you look at the countries which are here, India's presence in a grouping like this only speaks volumes about already established India's position as far as the global politics is concerned. Now, if we look at a question relating to environment on clean energy, that this is an order of the day. We have talked about Article 21 and how right to life also talks about pollution and environment. The same way, energy is also essential, both in terms of providing India or helping India with its energy requirements and climate considerations. So here we have to basically, kind of look at the policy changes that India is making in the area of climate change, especially in the context of geopolitics. So a couple of elements have been added here. We have energy, we have climate change, and also geopolitics. So we first look at that at the fact that India has accepted these net zero commitments, and this diplomacy is based upon India's principle that we have definitely common but differentiated responsibilities, and it's been very clear in how it has made its statement before the developed nations of the world. So how we have performed at the conference of parties, how we have used our negotiation strategy to benefit something which is favoring or rather supporting the third world nations. That is something which is very important as far as India is concerned. So India does not want any legally binding targets, okay, because India really feels that it has not been one of the biggest polluters. Moreover, the global profile of India has basically enhanced, okay, from being reactive to these Kyoto Protocol commitments to actually driving forward and being proactive as far as the Paris Agreement is concerned. So we are not taking a back seat and waiting for others to, decide, and then we are also on the high table now, where we are also in a way participating in determining policies for the entire globe that way. So as a part of this power politics agenda, India is really working with a lot of democratic nations to come up with organizations or platforms like the International Solar Alliance and One World, One Grid. Very, very monumental, important policies and frameworks which is expected to benefit and revolutionize the way in which India is changing its stance towards climate change in the entire international fora. So that is how we basically have to kind of look at each of these questions, how their answers were. The focus here as a takeaway is definitely go through the constitutional provisions, go through all the important articles, important provisions of president, governor, the usual topics of directive principles, fundamental rights, etc. But please do not miss the newspapers. Please do not miss the debates on different topics and issues. Read a lot of extra information on government publications of Yojana and Kurukshetra. All right, you really should be getting a lot of perspectives, and that perspective building, that analysis is something that is important. So what is the outcome, or rather the main point of this, that as an aspirant of the UPSC examination, you need to have a thinking mind. The point is not in recollection, the point is thinking, having a logical bent of mind, trying to collate things put together, having a mind of your own, having been able to think and understand and come to necessary deductions and conclusions. So that is how your approach to this particular examination should be, to this particular paper should be, and I wish you all the best for your future endeavors.